I think the other big piece is creating a culture of respect and trust, right? That trusting that your workers are going to want to show up and do their best and that they're putting in the effort, and then supporting asynchronous work somehow or flexibility at work somehow, whether that is, completely remote or partially remote, or work hours that can be flexible so that they can make the daycare pickup at 5 o'clock and know that they're gonna sign back on at 8:30 and then work for another 2 hours if they need to. Like that they will do the job even if it doesn't look like your standard 9 to 5. I think that's really important stuff to be thinking about, whatever age the kid is.
Hey everyone, it's Amy Lynn Durham, and you're listening to Create Magic at Work. Create Magic at Work is on a mission to equip senior leaders with tools they need to be a true quantum leader and actually understand what that means. Improve employee engagement, retain top talent, and transform your workplace culture to have less drama and stress. So let's start making magic. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Create Magic at Work. Today, I'm excited to bring you a new perspective on leadership with our special guest, Dr. Ann Welsh. After leaving a career at Harvard, Dr. Ann Welsh launched her own practice to support women and mothers through therapy, executive coaching, and consulting. With a specialized focus in working with women in STEM, healthcare, and law, she is an expert in the transition from working person to working parent. Dr. Welsh combines her research background with practical experience to help women grow their careers and advise employers on generating impactful policies and practices to support them. Yay! And welcome to Create Magic at Work.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. We have never talked about, we're on season 5 right now, and I'm like, wow, we've never addressed the working parent really, right? In any of the episodes, we talk a lot about how do I access my inner wisdom? How do I maintain faith during difficult times? How can I be a calming and healing presence? But we never really addressed that to the working parent. And so I'm really excited to have you share some of your wisdom with everyone surrounding that. And one of your themes that you like to speak about is, well, there's a lot of different themes, but the overall is growing in your career while also growing your family. And sometimes I think people feel like they really can't do both. And so my first question is that even possible?
Well, I think yes, but maybe not in the way that people think, right? It's not so much about having it all. There is this way in which being a working parent sometimes feels a little bit like playing a rigged game, right? Because the ideal worker is based off of someone working 9 to 5 with support at home. Usually that person is male in the kind of way it was set up. And the ideal mother is set up as someone who's home and her whole life is about her kids. And these are really unrealistic expectations in both cases. And yet, if you can kind of get away from the expectations, you have these two roles that do really feed each other and play off of each other, right? They're both, parenting is naturally a place in which you are forced to grow and figure it out a little bit as you go along and tolerate not having all the answers. And the same is true of leadership, right? Where you've never been a leader the first time you're a leader and you've got to learn as you go and try things and see what fits for you. And so there is this very natural interplay when we allow it to be kind of messy and organic and get outside of these boxes of what, we think an ideal parent or worker is supposed to be.
Yeah, I jumped right in. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you wanted to add to your experience and your bio for everyone listening before we move on to I have a bunch of questions I'm going to pick your brain on. So
Sure. I think it's just my own bio is maybe a story of how those two things interplay. My background is in counseling psychology, which has a pretty heavy vocational focus. And so I've been working with career and kind of how do people develop careers and how do they think about what their career is for a very long time. And my research looked at motherhood. And I was not a mother at the time. It was just an area that was really understudied. And so there was a lot of room for exploring new questions. But at the time, I had in my head what my career would look like. And it shifted a lot over the course of having my 4 kids that I've had since then, from thinking I really wanted to be an academic to moving into enjoying practice and then to establishing my own practice when the job I was at, that was my ideal job. I was at Harvard. I was working in student mental health. I loved it on some levels, but I needed a little more flexibility and they weren't willing to give it. And so I walked away and set up my own practice. And that's been a much better fit for me, for my family. But that's not what I saw coming. And it was only really parenthood that kind of opened me up to the flexibility to even consider being an entrepreneur and kind of exploring that side of myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. A lot of thoughts coming up for me. I wonder how much talent companies lose for not offering flexibility. And because of that, they lose this talent because they take off and start an entrepreneur type journey, right?
Yes.
Which is beautiful and a calling in itself, but it's not for everyone. And so, yes. I mean, if you could just comment on that, I think that's a big gap in the workplace with organizations.
100%, right? And I think, COVID really shifted things in terms of people having to leave the workplace and recognizing how vital flexibility is to that. And I think you're totally right. Like my whole mission in some ways is to say that working parents bring a lot to the table and you are missing out as an organization if you can't keep them. I mean, just financially alone, right? If you have a highly skilled worker, replacing that worker is over 1.5 times their salary, not to mention the loss of kind of knowledge that they have built in and the onboarding time of getting someone new started and the impact on culture and morale if they leave. And it often doesn't take huge changes from a company level to support that person and make it so that they're able to stay.
Okay. So on that note, I want to ask a couple of questions from both sides and both viewpoints. So the first one is, I've seen it in my own career, the view that if somebody has a lot of parental responsibilities that is pulling them away from maybe a presence at the workplace, that person, it might not be spoken out loud, but they definitely could be passed over for certain opportunities. Is there anything that leaders can do that can help them be part of the solution with that, rather than, oh my gosh, so-and-so is not, they can't dedicate X amount of hours to this job because they are too busy and distracted with their parental duties?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think the first is to be aware that we're all going to be distracted by something, right? We all are humans outside of work. And so to assume that somehow parents are more distracted is kind of ludicrous, right? Because other people have aging parents, or they have, they're training for an Ironman and they're doing insane amounts of exercise, or they, have their own health issue or whatever, right? Life gets lifey, right? Life happens, stuff gets in the way of work. That's kind of part of being a human at the workplace. And so to recognize working parents are just one of many ways in which we have lives outside of work. So, that's, I think, number one. And also to recognize that the stereotype around working parents actually, not only does it hurt working parents, it hurts all women, right? A lot of times people make assumptions that women of a certain age are going to be having kids, and it does then show up overall as a penalty to those women. Even if they're actively saying they are not going to have kids, there may be an assumption that they're going to, and they don't get promoted or what have you. So just kind of challenging assumptions and bias. I think the other big piece is creating a culture of respect and trust, right? That trusting that your workers are going to want to show up and do their best and that they're putting in the effort, and then supporting asynchronous work somehow, or flexibility at work somehow, whether that is, completely remote or partially remote, or work hours that can be flexible so that they can make the daycare pickup at 5 o'clock and know that they're going to sign back on at 8:30 and then work for another 2 hours if they need to. Like that they will do the job, even if it doesn't look like your standard 9 to 5. I think that's really important stuff to be thinking about, whatever age the kid is.
Mm-hmm. Really, really great insights that everyone has some sort of other part of life besides work. It just depends on what it is. I just think this is so interesting to me. You're talking about flexibility and all these things, because to me, it starts with making some systemic changes also.
Yes.
Because that also alleviates these leaders feeling like they're left holding the bag if someone goes out on a leave.
Yes.
Or right. And then they feel resentment. And then that breeds all of these different things that you're talking about with bias and, you know, women of childbearing age getting possibly passed over for certain roles. And it's like, well, wow, what if we had a system that supported that so people didn't necessarily feel this way? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I think that's, one of the things that I really strongly advocate could help is implementing what's called parental leave coaching. So, I mean, have good parental leave policies in place, right? Have them be long enough, have them be gender neutral so that moms and dads are taking them. And I think are taking them is really important, right? Like they're not just there, but you're kind of quietly discouraged from taking it if you're not the birthing parent. And because I think it's actually really important to model that both mom and dad or mom and mom or adoptive parents all need to be involved in the life of their child from day one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to address your specific question, right, of sometimes then someone goes on leave and other people feel resentful. When, you have a well-planned leave, you can avoid a lot of that. And so with parental leave coaching, I'll go in and I'll start with the person that's going on leave and their manager. And we will meet for a couple coaching sessions before they ever go out and do a lot of planning around who is going to take which project for how long. What's that handoff going to look like? What's the communication going to look like while they're out? Then I kind of support the parent during the leave. And then again, on the other side of it, I support the parent and the manager once again on transitioning back in a way that employee feels like they know how to show up, they know what's expected of them, they know how they're going to onboard. And the manager also kind of knows how to deal with it, right? Because I think a lot of times as leaders, maybe we don't know what to say or how much to address the kids' presence. I've talked to a lot of new parents who come back to work and say, well, nobody even said anything about the baby. And it was really weird. And I felt totally invisible, or nobody said they missed me. And I was wondering if I was even valuable here at work. And so manager and leadership coaching around how to navigate that from both sides, I think can be really, really helpful in shifting that workplace culture, as well as giving the parent a different experience of it.
That's incredible. That's, I was thinking, how can we have a solution? How can we have backup systems to even add to that so everything feels a little more seamless for everyone? And I love how you're talking about parental leave coaching. How prevalent is that in organizations right now?
It's not super prevalent. There's a couple organizations that are kind of doing it trying to do it as a benefit, essentially through HR. So there's the Center for Parental Leave Leadership, and that's the, kind of who I have worked with as a training organization. There's Parentally and Parento. There's a couple other ones, but it's really a field that's kind of just getting off the ground. And I think it's one of those things, if you're an Amazon and it's a huge company, then it's helpful to have a huge scale organization that kind of comes in and says, here's a ready-made kind of coaching package, and here's what we can offer as an HR benefit. And I tend to work with slightly smaller companies where it's, maybe they only have one person that goes out on leave a year, but then we can really come up with like a bespoke solution for them and what that's going to look like with their specific parental leave policy and their specific team and the impact on that.
Yeah, I mean, especially the smaller companies, right?
Right.
Because if one person is taking a leave, oh my gosh, they probably are a very, very important part of the organization functioning as a whole. So I just think that anybody listening this is a really cool concept to help things go through seamlessly, to keep productivity and profitability going and
Right.
keep everyone happy. This parental leave coaching, it's a really cool concept that I just heard today that I'm excited about. So let's talk about the other side. Let's talk about we talked about organizations and kind of what they can do, some solutions, maybe with like a new lens. Let's talk about the working parent. I have a couple of questions here. The first one is, I want to hear the biggest myths that you talk about regarding balance that set working mothers up for failure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is that balance is a thing, right? And I say that because balance, I think a lot of times moms will come into my office and say like, I can't figure it out, I can't find balance, as if there is some magical mathematical formula that if I just figure it out, I'll feel totally steady. And there must be something wrong with me that I haven't figured that out yet. And the reality is it isn't ever going to be a static state, right? Sometimes work is going to take precedence over stuff with your family. Sometimes your family is going to take precedence. It's kind of like you're weighing the scales and tipping back and forth. I mean, if you've ever thought about, if you're standing on one foot and trying to balance, you're actually making all these little micro movements all the time and adjusting. It's not steady. Balance is still a little wobbly. And so that's like the big kind of overarching piece. But I think the other small pieces, right, are that balance is going to involve picking and choosing what you do and what you cannot do, or what you're not going to do.
Thank you for sharing that. So one of the things that I want to ask you about is, you talk about the misconception of balance that sets up working mothers for failure. And you offer some insight on what, or like a reframing of that, I guess, on what they could possibly believe or look at it from a different lens instead. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I think a lot of times moms walk into my office thinking that balance is this kind of nirvana state that they're going to be able to find if they can just get the right formula. And there's often a lot of guilt and shame that they haven't figured it out, and kind of assumptions that everyone else has. And so first we just start by breaking apart the idea that balance is even achievable, right? Or that balance is somehow a thing you find and then you have it, right? Balance is constant movement, in fact, and
Mm.
parenthood is constant change. Whatever, anyone that's had a kid can tell you, what works with them at 3 weeks old does not work with them at 6 weeks old, and certainly doesn't work with them at 6 years old or 16. And so you've got this kind of constantly changing seasonality to parenthood. And the way you adjust to that is by being flexible and allowing movement rather than standing kind of rigidly still, right? If you're on a tightrope and you stand completely still, you're going to fall off. You're actually making lots and lots of micro movements at all times. And so what does that look like in reality, right? It looks like we pick what we can do and what we can't do in a particular moment. And we set boundaries and say, no, I'm not going to do that, even if all the other parents are doing that. Or, if work is asking this of me and it feels like I cannot do it the way I would like to do it, I say no, or I ask for more time. It's okay to ask for help. That's the other piece. I use the analogy of juggling a lot of balls, and some of them are rubber and some of them are glass. Those glass ones are pretty important, right? And those ones you maybe really work hard to not drop, or you hand them over to someone else to hold on to for a while. The rubber ones are things you can either like put down on the ground and they're going to be fine if you don't do them for a while, or you can drop them, right? If the laundry does not get done, it's not really the end of the world. If your house is a mess, again, not the end of the world. Do you want to leave it that way forever? No, but it's okay if it slips for a little while. And there probably are similar tasks at work that are equally resilient, right? Where if you don't do them for a bit, you're going to be okay. And you can know for yourself, for your job, for your family, which kind of tasks are which.
Mm. Yeah. I know that we have all heard work-life balance, work-life balance, work-life balance, like thousands of articles, lots of people talking about it. I think that, well, one, I want to comment that I love the way that you explain balance, that it's not this like static position that you're in where all of a sudden you're like, whew, I'm balanced. That it's a dance. And it reminds me of, wow, it really reminds me of just some recent client interactions when we're talking about spiritual intelligence in the workplace.
Mm.
And what's really been coming up in the energetic consciousness recently with a lot of leaders is, how do I align with the ebbs and flows of life? How do I align with the ebb and flow of life? So it's not like I'm seeking some standstill space that out in the future that feels pretty much exhausting to try to go after. How do I align with the ebbs and flows of life? And your suggestion of, let this visualization of which balls can I set down, which ones are glass that are precious to me, prioritizing what's important to me, I think is a really nice insight that you shared. And I think that really helps you align with the ebb and flow of life in that way. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. If someone's listening and they are like, I'm exhausted, I don't know if I can sustain this. I'm parenting, 2 small children. I'm working full time, and something's got to give. What would your suggestion be to someone like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is like the number one thing that people come into my office with, right? Is as a working parent, is I feel totally overwhelmed or I feel unsupported. I'm, and I don't know what else to do. And so at first to recognize you feel that way because you're playing a rigged game. You can't be all things to all people and do it somehow without help. There's got to be support, and that support needs to be tangible support, right? Whether it is someone to help with the cleaning or hiring a cooking service or hiring someone to drive your kids around if they're in that age or whatever, help from your spouse, help from friends and family, but there also needs to be emotional support and camaraderie. And I think that's the piece that's often missing. With working parents in particular, they have this sense of like, I'm the only one not doing this correctly. I'm failing and everyone else has got it figured out. But the reality is the expectations are too much across the board, and we're all failing in some ways at meeting those expectations. And so often just that alone is enough to be like, okay, maybe I can do this. But then we'll start to work on, you mentioned kind of values, right? Like, what are your values? What's important to you? And sometimes that work can be a huge chunk of work, can take a long time. Mm-hmm. And then how are you going to make different choices than what you're doing that align with those? Because what you're describing, right, is someone who's on the edge, if not already in burnout space, mm-hmm. right? And so if we can figure out kind of what you value, what's important, then that can inform, what do I put down? And again, maybe you're only putting it down temporarily, but you've got to put some stuff down and make sure you yourself are one of those glass balls that you're kind of treating gently and having some more self-compassion for, and recognizing your own limits and your own needs, and that you are allowed to have needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for recognizing that is, burnout. I tend to see the permission given to take a break, or to receive help once burnout occurs. Like once there's the blow up or the moment, the big, life-changing moment. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more, because then that seems acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, you worked. You hit this moment where you have a health issue or a mental breakdown, or something arises that says, hey, wait a minute, you need to stop. And then it feels like the majority of the time organizations and leaders are kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, like you've had a breakdown, like, let's go ahead and take a break. And maybe there's some support there. What can we do before we hit that moment? What can leaders do to support that? And what can the person do to recognize that and ask for support? What are some ways that you envision that to be in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, right? Because You're exactly right. It's not until, maybe I'm having panic attacks and literally can't get into the office, right? It's escalated to such a point that I can't ignore it. And that ignoring it is exactly what everyone's been doing all along, right? It's fine. It'll get better. It'll pass. And it's not fine. And I think, it really does start with leadership. There was an article, I want to say earlier this year, that talked about, workplaces and managers have a bigger impact on people's mental health than their own spouse, right? I mean, it's a big deal. And so leaders need to be working on culture overall, right? And creating a culture of care and a culture of responsiveness. Because what happens is if you have that individual that hits burnout and has to take a leave to kind of put themselves back together, is that process takes a really long time, right? And it's like you've got this shattered cup now that you're gluing back together, and it may end up stronger on the other side for it, but to put it back together takes a lot of work for that individual, and then the company's missing out on them, and they may not return because the company culture is probably part of what created the burnout, and so then you lose out on someone that's maybe a great employee. So making sure that kind of mental health is a component of the corporate culture, and addressing it and allowing for people to take breaks, and making sure that there is leave, not just parental leave, but essentially leave that is accessible for all sorts of reasons, right? Essentially caretaking leave for one's self might be a way that I would put it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what just comes to me throughout this whole conversation is yes, 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 and having the systemic backups for that. Because that's when things really feel like things implode or there's resentment, because we kind of like run things at times with like quote unquote bare bones.
Yes.
And then we address the bomb that goes off when it goes off. So imagine a place that just runs seamlessly when, as you said, we all go through life experiences. So at some point in our life journey, we will need to take some sort of leave. If we're taking care of an aging parent, if we're having a child, whatever that may be. So it just makes sense to have some sort of systemic backup financially and for everyone's mental health. So I love that we're addressing this and getting people to think. So I want to call all of the leaders listening to the podcast to think about how can you be the solution when situations like this arise, and how can we be the solution that creates win-win moments for everyone. That's really what a wise and effective change agent is somebody that can take what's these seemingly opposing things and create a win-win solution from those. And that's a call to high-level leaders and to an elevated leadership skill set, which of course is what I coach on, right? Which is quantum leadership and all the things. So this is just a very important topic, and I really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights with it. Very appreciative. So on that note, I'd love to hear what your definition of a quantum leader is.
Yeah, I mean, I think quantum leadership to me strikes me as, essentially being a human, right? On a very fundamental level, it is leadership from your humanity. It's relational, it's growth oriented, right? It's operating from a mindset of, I'm going to become aware of myself and my strengths and my vision, and also the places where maybe I need to grow some, right? To have humility around it. And then kind of using all of that to see the humanity in others and to encourage them on that growing journey as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to pull a message for you from my journal prompt card deck. It's a deck of 33 cards. And this is a message for everyone listening and a message for you. What an amazing message for what we're talking about. We got responsibility.
Ooh.
Yes. I mean, we have been talking about responsibility and leadership and with self pretty much throughout this whole conversation. The affirmation is, I make decisions for others the way I would want them made for me. Powerful, considering the topic we were talking about, right?
Yes.
Very powerful. I make decisions for others the way I would want them made for me. Okay, so Dr. Ann Welsh, what are some ways that leaders can be empathetic and non-judgmental, let's say when approaching these types of situations in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly right what you just said, to make those decisions as you would want them made for you, not how they were made for you. And I think that's sometimes what happens, right? It's,
I love
well,
that.
this is what it was like when I was coming up. This is what it's like when I had kids. Okay, but the world is a very different place now. And so, I mean, COVID is such a great example of this, right? I've certainly talked with clients and with firms who are really pushing this back to work 5 days a week, and they're losing working parents because of it. And yes, pre-COVID, we had a world in which that was the norm, but it isn't really anymore. And we've been able to do it without enforcing that norm. And so are we going back because that's how it was, or are we going back because that's what's best? And so really sitting with that question for yourself as a leader: what's my goal? And can I make decisions that support the folks that are underneath me in growing? And maybe that's different than how I was supported or not supported coming up the ranks.
Yep. So good. Thank you for sharing that. I think back to, the years and years and years I worked in corporate management, hundreds of employees, following the HR policies that were laid out at that time. And a couple of weeks, I mean, it was recent, a few months ago, maybe, I was thinking back to our bereavement policy, and it was similar to, it wasn't out of the ordinary, similar to many companies back at that time. They all kind of modeled the same type of HR, and it was like, I mean, don't quote me on this, but it was a very small amount of time someone was able to take off if they had a parent pass away or a loved one, 2 to 3 days, right? Yeah. And I think about that now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was kind of a robot in the zone, just following these policies in my early 30s. Oh, your mother died. Yeah, you have 3 days. And then, you got to come back from, like, where's the empathy in that? So when you speak to not doing things the way they've been done for you, that story strikes a chord with me. Yeah. If I, running Create Magic at work, as the team grows, if somebody has a loved one pass, it's not this hard 2 to 3 days, and then you have to show up again or you're done, right? And I think the corporate culture is evolving in that way. And because we're having these conversations, it's changing one conversation at a time. And it's exactly what this card just said. I make decisions for others the way I would want them made for me. If I had a death of a loved one in my family, I would probably need more than a couple of work days off. Just me. Right. But again, I don't think it's just me. Right. So making those decisions that ripple out, have the system backups, and have beautiful people like you that can step in and do these transition or these leave coaching type situations to set everyone else up for success. I think those are my biggest takeaways from our conversation today. So I just want to thank you so much for being on the show and for getting all of us to think a little bit more about the way we lead and the impact that we're leaving. And if anyone wants to reach out and connect with you and learn more, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, they can go to my website, which is just www.drannwelsh.com, or my LinkedIn is also Dr. Ann Welsh. And if they're more of an Instagram folk, I have dr.welsh.coaching on Instagram as well.
Perfect. And as always, we'll put all those links in the show notes. So if anyone's listening, you can just click in the show notes and connect with Dr. Ann Welsh. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show today.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Hey everyone, Amy here. I am so excited to share this news with you. If you've been a longtime listener of the podcast, or even if you're new, you probably know that I weave spiritual intelligence through all of the episodes of Create Magic at Work. And we often talk about where you are at with making wise and compassionate decisions, what it looks like to be a wise and effective change agent. How do I put my ego aside and operate from my higher self? And if you've ever been curious as to what level you're sitting at in your life in those skills, I have some great news for you. I have loaded the SQ21 assessment on the Create Magic at Work website. This is something that only my private clients have access to in a coaching partnership with me. However, I have decided to give everyone access to the SQ21 assessment at a generous price, a small fee. You can take the assessment at createmagicatwork.net/shop, and you will get a printout that you can take with you the rest of your life as to where you're sitting, what level you're sitting at in the 21 skills of spiritual intelligence. This is an amazing opportunity. I encourage you to take advantage of it. Again, if you've ever been listening to all of the past episodes like, I wonder where I sit at making wise and compassionate decisions, or I wonder where I sit at being able to access my higher self, explore that curiosity and go to the website and take the assessment. I will also have that link dropped in the show notes so it's easily accessible to you here after the episode. And again, if you have any questions or if you just want to have a chat with me, I'm always available for a complimentary 30-minute coffee chat, so you can explore that as well. But get over to the website, take that assessment, and give yourself the gift of something that you can take with you for the rest of your life. Sending magic to you. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming back every week to listen to a new episode of Create Magic at Work and really helping to support and advocate for healthy leaders, workplaces, and lives for all of us. If you want any information on how to connect with me, click on the link in the show notes. You'll get access to all of the social media links for Create Magic at Work. Stay following along for more amazing episodes where we help you improve productivity and profitability in the workplace and decrease stress. Sending magic to everyone, and see you next time.